share my screen. It's just the introduction or the cover page.
Okay, so this is a total different format than we're used to doing these sessions in. It's usually very nice to be able to be on campus and to show off our classrooms and to show all that off as well. But due to COVID, we've switched to this route. And honestly, this may be a good route in the future because folks can listen to replays. I know we do have at least 8 registered for the session, so you may see some people popping in from time to time. But this is definitely being recorded. So if a friend of yours missed it, just tell them to go to our website and they can click on a link and just rewatch the whole session at their leisure. So welcome to the Project Management Information Session. My name is Becky McKee. I'm the Program Director for Open Enrollment in Workforce Solutions. So what is Workforce Solutions? That's a question we get a lot of times. Workforce Solutions is actually a unit as part of the college. We are the Continuing and Professional Development Department. We offer classes ranging from IT certifications to human resources, to trades, to healthcare. We do primarily shoot for classes that have certification possibilities because we know that that's what counts for folks on their resumes. We serve just, you'd probably be surprised to know that we serve just as many students in the Workforce Solutions Department as our academic side of the college does with their degrees and transfer programs. So we are a very large producing department, small staffed, large producing department. Really quick, I just want to mention to you the classes that we have coming up in the project management field. We have a new project management series that Chris Grassmonk has created for us that starts from stakeholder management and ends up with risk management. It's a 4-part series. Very excited to kick that off here in January, only in a few weeks from now. Very, very exciting. So we do have that series that we can talk about further in depth later. We also have our ever popular introduction to project management class, and that is coming up in March. So those are ways to dip your feet into the project management world. And then we also have our regular project management PMP CAPM certification program that Chris also leads, and that's coming up in April. So that's the certification program. That's the whole enchilada, if you will. I think that a lot of folks that come to these sessions want to talk mostly in depth about that program because there's a lot of pieces to that certification program. All right, so at this point, I am going to turn it over to Sherry Pinto. She is our operations lead, and she can talk to you a little bit about just the registration process, the funding options that we actually have now due to some CARES Act funding that certain localities in our area have gotten. So she's going to talk about that. We're going to then turn it over to our career coach, Julia, for an introduction of herself. And then we'll be turning it over to Chris Grassmonk, your instructor, who will introduce himself when we get to him. All right, so take it away, Sherry.
Okay, and I remembered to unmute myself, so we're good to go. All right, welcome everyone. I just wanted to tell you quickly about some funding options we do have currently through Workforce Solutions, through some of our local jurisdictions, as Becky mentioned. The local jurisdictions of Warren County, Shenandoah County, the town of Stanley, and the town of Luray are currently offering scholarships to individuals in their localities. The caveat to any of this funding is that a student must have been financially impacted by COVID. Our office does have applications that you are welcome to fill out. However, The jurisdictions, again, have said as long as you've been financially impacted by COVID, they will cover 75% of the cost of one of these classes. Again, I'll go over it one more time just so everyone's aware. Warren County, Shenandoah County, Town of Stanley, and Town of Luray are the jurisdictions offering these scholarship opportunities to you. So if you have any questions about the scholarships, if you want an application, they are on our website, and you can find those under funding options at lfccworkforce.com. Again, if you ever have any questions about funding opportunities, please feel free to contact our office. Our number, just to let you know, is 868-7021, and we will be more than willing to help you out with that.
And just to add what what she said, when it is time to register, if you decide to register for these courses, you can call that number that she just gave you. You can register online at our website, lfccworkforce.com. If you would like, you could even stop by the office to make payment. But because you have to pay up front for our classes, that's why we wanted to make sure you also knew about those funding opportunities, to check into that if you happen to reside in one of those localities and are impacted by COVID, because that could take that could cover 75% of the cost of these classes. So it's pretty significant if you do live in those localities. So thank you so much, Sherry.
Wonderful. Thanks, Becky.
All right, Julia.
Hi, my name is Julia Bridgen, and I am the new workforce coach with Workforce Solutions. So I am kind of the stop that people take before they talk to operations if they're interested in learning more about our classes. Maybe they're not really sure what they want to take, but they know they want to take something. So that's what I am here for. So if anybody ever wants to talk about any of our classes, they can feel free to reach out to me. My email address is jbridgen@lfcc.edu. And I can also be reached by, phone at 540-742-7571.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the meat of the session, talking about all the programs that we have to offer. We'll turn it over to Chris Grassmonk. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Becky. Thanks, everyone. I apologize for not going on video, but I don't want to mess up the slide presentation here in Zoom. So assume that I still look like my picture, just a little bit older. And probably with a few more pounds. Anyway, my name's Chris Grassmuck. I've got about 25 years of project management experience. As you can see on the slide there, most of that experience has come within the federal government and Department of Defense, and it spans from product development, where I've developed communications products for the military, as well as software development for the federal government. I worked with the CENTCOM Commanders Communications team. Currently work a big project here with FEMA out here in the Winchester area, and enjoy that for the last going on 9 years. Prior to jumping over to Trillion Technologies as the Director of Governance, I spent about 7.5 years with IBM, where I led 2 major programs worth about $15 million. And I also had an opportunity to combine 2 of my loves, both project management as well as teaching, where I was a faculty member with the IBM Consulting Academy, along with being an instructor here at Lord Fairfax Workforce Solutions for the last 4 years, which I've really enjoyed quite a bit. As I mentioned, one of my passions is project management. I've had the opportunity to be the vice chairman for the Shenandoah Valley community of the world's largest PM chapter here in Washington, D.C. area. And I've done that for the last 8 years with a fellow coworker out here. And that just that provides an opportunity for project managers, whether you're certified or not, to come together, hear about new ideas on how best practices on how to run projects, as well as those folks who are certified. You get an opportunity to get your continuing education credits, which is important for those certified project managers looking to maintain their certification. Some of the other things I do when I'm not teaching or working, I'm a father of two. I've got a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school and a fourth grader who just turned 10. So they keep me pretty busy when I'm not teaching or not working. I enjoy business, enjoy leading organizations and teams, and as you pointed out there, I'm an international, quote unquote, international speaker. I had an opportunity to travel to Slovenia 2 years ago and actually give a class or a course over there, or speaking opportunity over there to the local PMI chapter there. Next up, talk about project management, or where project managers add their value. We help organizations maintain their customer focus, and that's of course key in driving customer satisfaction, as well as achieving a high rate of success in delivering projects or products to our customers. The other thing we get an opportunity to do is develop great teams. One of the reasons I like being a project manager is you get to wear many hats. Not only do you get to be the CEO of your project, you also get to handle the finances. So you get to be the CFO at any given date or time, but you also get to be the HR manager, bringing on resources to your project, and then of course leading that team towards a common goal, and of course ultimately resulting in customer satisfaction, maintaining customer focus. And of course the best way to grow and develop those great teams is to delegate. We as project managers or project leaders have to realize that we can't do this alone. We do need a good team around us, so we have to make sure that we delegate. Along with that, we have to make sure that we challenge the folks that are on our team, as well as the key stakeholders who are, either proponents or sponsors of our projects within the C-suite of our organization. We have to make sure that they understand where we are at the project. Not only delivering the good news, but also the bad news when those situations come up. Other things where we add value to is identifying and controlling risk. As Becky mentioned earlier, we've got a course coming up, I think in the March timeframe, where I go in depth on how to identify those risks, do the analysis of those risks, and then ultimately figure out a strong mitigation strategy, whether you accept that risk or you defer that risk onto a different time or onto someone else. And then ultimately, as a project manager, we're responsible for delivering, whether it's a product or a service that we've sold to a customer, or if it's an internal project, making sure that we deliver it on time. And you see there on the left hand of the slide there, making sure we deliver on time, within budget, within a high level of satisfaction, meaning within that scope. And then ultimately wrapping that up into making sure that we deliver a high quality product. And you combine all of those, of course, you come up to a high level of customer satisfaction, making sure that we have the right deliverable at the right cost at the right time, ultimately doing the right things. I'll pause there real quick. I've lost visibility of who's in the room here, but I don't know if there's any questions in the chat. And I guess I'll pause here to mention, if you do have any questions, feel free to stop me, and I'll be glad to take those at any time. All right. Moving on here. This is some of you, if you're in project management, you'll recognize this triangle. It's the golden triangle, the iron triangle, or ultimately called the triple constraints. And this is where a project manager really measures our success. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we're worried about time, cost, and scope. And if any one of those legs of that triangle change, it impacts the others. So if you want to increase the scope, of course, it's ultimately probably going to change the time and cost. And PMIs develop this PMP or CAPM certifications to help project managers work towards successful projects. And that's how we're measured again: time, cost, scope, and then all wrapped up into quality. So why project management? Again, I've been leading projects for about 25 years. I can tell you that I've had more failures than successes on my projects. But with each one of those failures, I've learned something, and ultimately it's helped me achieve success on the next project or another project. So why are project managers important? Some of these points here: 77% of high-performing companies understand the value of project managers. That's why project management is such a growth industry right now. PMI recently celebrated their 1 millionth PMP certification, and it continues to grow both in PMP as well as CAPM and some of their other sub certifications that they do offer. Only 2.5% of companies successfully complete 100% of their projects. And this just highlights why there needs to be more trained and certified PMs. Because with this training, with the certification, organizations know that we know, or a certified project manager knows, the best practices and the education, the tools that they need to help deliver a successful project within their organization, ultimately, growing their business and helping them succeed. Next bullet there is only 26% of all projects are successful. Like I mentioned, this is where there needs to be more training. One of the reasons we came up with a few of these new project management classes is to help, if you're not interested in achieving the certification, don't feel that you have the experience quite yet, these upcoming classes starting just next week actually will help get a taste of what's required to deliver successful projects, and help those folks who don't have the experience in projects ultimately achieve a higher rate of success. And if you are certified or do have or are a more seasoned or senior level project manager, it also serves as a great reminder and puts additional tools in your toolbox, so to speak, so that you can reach that higher level of success. As I mentioned on a previous slide, at any time we're wearing multiple hats as project managers. And so, one of those hats that we wear is a communicator, and making sure that communication gets to the right person at the right time for the right reasons. So, 57% of projects fail due to a breakdown in communications. That's why PMs or project managers are the leader or hub of their project. They're taking in that information, doing the analysis on that information, then ultimately getting that out to the right stakeholders, whether it's their leadership within the organization, or if it's the customer who needs to know bad news, good news, or whatever, so that they can make a better educated decision. And then finally, I was taught early on in my career that bad news doesn't get better with time. And so we have to make sure that we're communicating information to our senior management. 3/4 of projects fail because they don't involve their senior leadership into that projects or programs. These projects are brought in and sponsored by our senior leadership within our organizations to achieve specific organizational goals, bring in additional revenue, and so it's your responsibility as a project manager to make sure that you communicate out to your senior leadership to give the status of how your projects are going, and if they're not going well, to make sure that you communicate that in time so that you can get them involved. More heads involved in the problem help solve that a lot quicker. So I'll pause there just to see if we've got any questions out there in the chat. I'll take that as a no.
No questions as of yet, Chris, but you're doing well. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Guy. take an opportunity there to get a drink. So Becky mentioned some of the upcoming courses, and I apologize in advance for overlooking our introductory to project management course that starts up in March. But starting just next week, starts that 4-part series, 4 key processes to delivery success, which is the project management series that we here at Workforce Solutions came up with, as I mentioned, to help not only early career project managers, but those seasoned veterans who have made a career in project management, help them build or re-energize their toolbox so that they can better lead and direct their projects to success. So those 4 key processes that I pulled out of PMI or the PMBOK were stakeholder management. After teaching the certification class and the intro class for the last 4 years, it's always interesting when we get to the stakeholder management piece of the course that folks don't realize that stakeholders are anybody who has impact or is impacted by their projects. So helping identify those stakeholders early on, and then ultimately prioritizing how you're going to interact with those stakeholders is going to start you on the path of success in your projects. The next course there is we have project schedules, 6 steps to a project schedule. Oftentimes, and it's interesting, I deal with this on a daily basis running some of my programs and projects, is everyone knows that they need a schedule for their projects, and oftentimes it comes in that pretty little Gantt chart set up by Microsoft Project. Well, a project has multiple steps. You can't do it alone. And so we'll go into the 6 different steps on how to build a project schedule. And then we have project management plan. You can't do anything without the plan. So you've got to plan the work and then work the plan. And so we'll talk about some of the sub-plans that make up ultimately the project management plan. And of course, ultimately, that's a project manager's Bible on how they lead and run their projects. So we'll get into some of the sub-plans during that course as well. And then finally, we wrap up the series with risk management. Of course, that one of the activities I do on a daily basis is look out over the horizon to figure out what icebergs are ahead in trying to lead this ship of a project and keep it on course. So trying to identify those potential risks, do the analysis on them to determine what impact there is, what probability there is, and then ultimately mitigating those project pitfalls.
Hey, Chris, can I jump in real quick there?
Please.
Okay. So those classes that Chris was just talking about, just so you guys know, if you haven't seen one of our catalogs yet, those classes can be taken a la carte, which means separate, or all together in a bundle series. So each one of those classes, the stakeholder management, for example, that's on January 20th. Project schedules is on February 3rd. Project management plan the work the plan comes up on February 17th. And then risk management comes up on March 3rd. So you can bundle them together and take them all as one series. And that would be, the cost is $259 unless you're able to tap into some of those locality funds that are out there. So there is a little bit of a discount to take all of them, but we do have folks already scheduled that some folks are taking them a la carte and some folks are taking the full series. So it's very exciting that this is all brand new. This is a brand new series for us. Like Chris said, it's created straight from the PMI PMBOK. So very exciting stuff for us.
Yeah,
all right, Chris, I'm turning it back to you.
Sounds good, Becky. Thank you. Next up there, I just have the dates there for the upcoming PMP and CAPM exam prep course that I teach, and it's over a 9-week period, or 9 classes broken out into 4 hours a night. That's really worked out well for us, as well as the students. There are plenty of opportunities to take the the weekend cram courses and things like that. But this course really gives you an opportunity to listen to the materials, read the materials, and then test yourself on the materials weekly as we go through and step through the associated processes and information that's presented in the course material. We all, I suspect we all know that the exam has changed, and I'll get into that a little bit in an upcoming slide here. But the exam is new. The information is broken out a little bit differently, but ultimately is still based on PMI and the PMBOK 6th edition. Jumping over here, just some of the details. I think I hit on some of these as well as Becky. Just again, January 20th, we've got the stakeholder management. Identify, prioritize, and understand your stakeholders for project success. As it says there, no project is an island. There are folks who are impacted or have impact on your projects. So it's all about figuring out who those are as early as possible, determining and figuring out how to manage their involvement, what their expectations are, and then getting them to be, a proponent or at least not a detractor to your projects, and identifying the folks that that can help you if and when you need it. So by the end of that course, you'll be familiar on how to identify your internal and external stakeholders, including your stakeholders include folks on your project team. Plan how to manage those stakeholders, manage their engagement, of course, support, and get their involvement ultimately for project success, right? Again, that's on January 20th, just next week. So it's about 2.5 hours. It's just enough time to understand, go through some relevant exercises, and as I say there at the end, come out of that class with a few tools for the toolbox. And then on February 3rd, we go into the 6 steps to a project schedule. As you can see there, that class is a little bit longer because it's not simply sitting down in front of Excel or sitting down in front of Microsoft Project and developing a schedule. I can't tell you the number of times I've been told by my boss or a project sponsor to, hey, we've got this project, needs to be done by this time, go off and build a project schedule and start running each project. That is not the way it should work. I know oftentimes it's the way we're told to do it, but PMI is been doing this for over 50 years. And so there are some distinct processes that we should follow ultimately for project schedule success, but project success as well. So it's, we're going to talk about planning your schedule and then defining those activities, so it's these, what I call baby steps. So you're going to define those activities. You're going to get those activities and put them in an order. And that could be the right order right off the bat, or you have to work with your stakeholders and figure out what that right order is, or work with those folks who are going to be doing those activities and get it in the right order. And we're going to talk to your subject matter experts and see how long those activities are going to take individually. So you're going to estimate the durations. And then finally, you're going to develop your schedule. You're going to get all that information together, get it in the right order, get the durations done, aggregate those durations, see if see if that timeline is actually doable that you were told by your project sponsor or your boss, and then post that schedule or baseline that schedule. And then the 6th and final step there is controlling the schedule, making sure that things are going as you planned, and if they're not, what's the process for making those changes? Next course is February 17th from 5:30 to 8, and it is the project management plan, planning the work and working the plan. Of course, as I mentioned, the project management plan is your Bible. It tells you, your project team, as well as any stakeholders who might be involved on how you're running this project. Ultimately, the much larger project management plan is made up of smaller supporting plans, such as the scope management plan or cost management plan, quality management plan, resource or human resource management plan, and that's how you're bringing these folks in on your under your team. So when you have a plan, you're able to execute your projects much more efficiently. So we'll do a deep dive into, what plans are necessary, how to build those, to what size you should build those management plans to effectively run your projects. And then finally, we wrap up the series on March 3rd. Again, another 3-hour course for risk management. Identify, analyze, and mitigate your project pitfalls. So we're, anything worth doing is going to have risks. Everything that we do in our daily lives or on a project, has some sort of risks. It's determining or figuring out what the likelihood of those risks becoming an issue are. And so we'll talk about, how to effectively identify those. Are you, as a project manager, the only person who's going to identify those risks? So we'll talk about that risk management plan. So we'll tie in that other project management plan course a little bit into this risk management course. How we're going to manage those risks. What are we going to do about those when we do identify them? Are we going to set aside, additional funding? We're going to identify resources that can overcome or mitigate those risks. So we've got an exciting series coming up here this winter. So I'll pause there. Any questions out there? All right. So we'll talk about the PMP or CAPM certification course. Starts April 7th and goes through June 2nd there. You'll see I've highlighted the changes that have occurred in the exam starting just last week, January 2nd, or I guess 2 weeks ago on January 2nd. We've gone from 200 questions, 5 process groups, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, control, and closing. Learn about 49 processes and their inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. And it's been broken into people, processes, and business environment. And you see the percentages here are basically the number of questions, the amount of information that's going to be tested on that new exam. As I mentioned before, the course is still taught based on the PMBOK 6th edition. Much of the materials that I've been using for the past 3.5-4 years is still the same. It's just the format and the way it's presented has changed just a little bit. We also start focusing a little more on the agile or agile hybrid approaches to project management as opposed to the traditional or waterfall methodology that's been utilized for, like I said, the last 50, 60 years here. So PMI has recognized that, the agile methodology is a much more effective or efficient way of managing many of the projects that have come out recently. As it says down there at the bottom, the exam itself changed a little bit. There's only 180 questions. Still the same number of questions are being scored as the previous exam, which had 200 questions. It's about a 4-hour exam. There's 10 minutes that are missing here in this 30 minutes because that's due to some breaks that they put in. Prior to this year, they really put it to you, and you had to schedule your breaks or plan your breaks a little more efficiently than they test you or allow you now. So I'll pause there again for a real quick second. I know there's been a lot of interest lately with the changes in the exam. I'll be upfront and transparent here. I'm still working through the materials that are associated with it, so I'll do my best to answer any questions if there are. And the exam changes are related to the PMP exam. The CAPM exam has not changed yet. All right, sounds like we've got a quiet group. If you are thinking about sitting for the PMP certification exam, the requirements are that if you have your bachelor's degree, you have to have 3 years of project management experience or 4,500 hours of non-overlapping project leading or project directing experience, along with 36 contact hours, or 35 contact hours, for which the PMP certification course that I teach covers or accounts for that, for those contact hours. If you have a high school diploma or associate's degree or some sort of equivalent, you need five years of project management experience and about 7,500 hours of non-overlapping project leading or project directing experience. As I tell any of the students who are interested in sitting for the PMP cert class or cert exam, don't let these numbers scare you off. I'll be happy to walk through a sample application with you, and it really will open up your eyes on how much experience you really do have. It does not have to be just work experience. It can be social projects as well.
Chris, we got a comment about calculating the hours of experience. How do you begin to do that based on 7,500 hours? Is it years on the job or actual hours accumulated working through a project? Can you explain how to calculate those hours?
Sure. It is calculated calculated by projects that you run. So if you are running overlapping projects, then what you would do is you'd throw both of those into the electronic application, and it's going to do the math for you. So it's going to separate if they are a January to December overlapping project, a 1-for-1 overlapping, then only one of those projects is going to be counted. But if they are a January to December and then a March through April of the next year project, then those additional 3 months there on the end are going to count towards this experience. Does that make sense?
I think so. You can't double dip it.
You can't double dip,
yes.
right? Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you saw the chat there, but looks like she's got another question.
Okay.
If I don't know yet, and if I have all of my hours, should I take the test and begin my application process? So if she's got an idea of how many hours she has, and should she go and begin the process of taking the test and applying?
So I guess do you have the contact hours required, Brandy? And I guess I can clarify. So you don't have to apply to come in and take the exam prep course. Typically what I advise doing is you come in, you take the exam prep course, and there towards the end is when you'll want to start filling out your application. It doesn't take very long to complete your application. You submit that to PMI. Takes them about a week to review your application and approve you to sit for the test. And there are sample applications out there, or you can go on PMI.org and start your application there, and you can save it up for up to 90 days. And it'll help you calculate those hours if you're concerned.
I have a question. What kind of pay is out there regionally, I guess locally, or even nationally around project managers who do have this certification?
Thanks, Guy. I appreciate that question, and actually meant to put that in the slides here. It's a huge difference. Usually I save this story for the first or second night of class. So probably I'd say it's been about 9 years, a little over 9 years. I was actually unemployed and an uncertified project manager. And so, I'd had by that time, a significant number of years in project management, but could not um, get hired on anywhere, despite my experience, despite my network of friends and former colleagues. So decided to buckle down and take the PMP exam, and it was a night and day difference between not getting any phone calls, not getting any responses to applications, to actually being hired. Being hired and picked up by IBM in this case. But I was starting to get those responses to my application and to my resume when I started submitting it. But yeah, there's probably about a 20%, I think that's the number, about a 20% difference between a certified and non-certified project manager when it comes to salary. So it is a big difference, and oftentimes that difference can even become or even come within the same organization. So I'm not saying that you have to go outside of the organization once you're become certified project manager, but I've seen the reports and actually seen it in person where once they're certified, they become that much more valuable to their organization. So their salary increases to keep them on board.
And Brittany has a question too about should she apply and be accepted to take the test and then take the class, or take the class first before she goes to apply?
You can't submit your application until you qualify. So you have to have the 3 or 5 years of experience, the number of hours, and then actually have sat in a class or gotten those 35 hours of education. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't more clear on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Cool. Just moving over here to the CAPM, and again, still open to questions as they pop up. And I've managed to manage technology here and get the chat open there as well. So the CAPM certification oftentimes is kind of that entry level certification. It is not required. A CAPM is not required to go forward and get your PMP. It is a separate certification. It has a much lower threshold requirement to sit for it. So you either need a high school diploma or associate's degree or equivalent in 1,500 hours of experience, or 23 contact hours, for which again, this PMP exam prep or CAPM exam prep course, in this case, more than prepares you for those 23 contact hours from any project management course. The certification is good for 5 years. Unlike the PMP exam, you do not have a continuing education credit or unit or PDU requirement. But obviously, one of the benefits or one of the highlights that make the PMP and CAPM or any PMI certification worth its weight and be so respected out there in industry is that industry knows and organizations know that certified project managers or associate project managers are out there getting their continuing to maintain their education when it comes to project management. A note on this on these contact hours, both for CAPM as well as PMP, once you take this course or take this project management education, it's good for the life of your desire to become a certified project manager. So you sit and take this course and decide that you don't have the experience required to sit for the exam, or some other life event or something comes up and you're just no longer interested in it, and 2 years down the road you're interested in sitting for the exam, you still would qualify with those contact hours, having taken this course already. Any questions? I think that's about it. The CAPM or the PMP certification exam is about $450. I don't believe that's changed. And the CAPM is about $225. That's not a exam fee that's related to LFCC or Workforce Solutions. That's a PMI cost. Like I said, I don't believe that's changed in 2021. The next up is just my boring question slide here. And then one of the benefits of being in the, being a member of PMI, you can get a digital copy of the PMBOK. You save some money on your certification and any additional continuing education units. There's plenty of networking opportunities, tools, templates, and then projectmanagement.com was recently purchased, or about 2.5 years ago, purchased by PMI. And there are tons of templates and blogs and information exchanges out there on ideas on how to better or more efficiently and effectively run your projects. And then PMIWDC is, like I said, the world's largest chapter. I think we've actually grown during COVID times. There's about 10,000 members. I run one of the communities, or help run one of the communities that make up these 10,000 members out here in Winchester. We meet about once a quarter. It's been a little tougher for us out here, or during COVID times, but we've tried to make it work using Zoom sessions and such. And there is no cost. All our continuing education units are free.
And since you were talking about the cost of the test, Chris, just want to pipe in and make everyone aware that the project management certification class is $13.99. And like we said before, there's several different ways you can register and check into the locality funding. It looks like we do have one more question in the chat. When is the next edition of the PMBOK supposed to be out, and the basis of the test?
So the 7th edition is due out probably the middle of this year, and it's going to go from about a 750-page book down to about 250 pages. And of course, anything you read, they'll tell you that the exam is not based on the PMBOK. It's based on project management information and training, which some of that is contained in the PMBOK between us on this call. But the exam won't change based on the PMBOK 7th edition coming out. It'll most likely change slightly. The exam will probably change slightly only as they get new information or lessons learned based on early adopters or early exam takers. Hopefully that helps.
Are there any other questions? Do you have questions for our career coach, or questions just about the registration process?
Yeah, well, while folks are thinking there, and as you mentioned, Becky, we've got the intro class starting in March, which is a 2-night class, and it's really a high level highlight of the processes identified in the PMBOK. So it's just really a taste of what project management is, and again, it's more of a skill sharpening opportunity for folks who do have experience in project management, and those who don't. It's kind of it's a really good taste, of what all is involved in project management, and they can take it back to their organizations and do better things within their organization, and hopefully become more interested in project management. But it's always interesting, some of the feedback in the first 2 or 3 nights, and then there at the end of some of the classes I teach. It's really eye-opening for folks on what all goes into project management. So I enjoy it. I think it's fun.
I'm glad you brought up that class, because that has been a backed by popular demand class. I feel like ever since we put that in place, it continues to, folks continue to register for it every semester. That does start March 15th. So it's March 15th and the 22nd. I believe it's from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. And that one is $159 if you're interested in that one. Don't be shy. Ask as many questions as you want. We've got about 7 minutes left. So
yeah, all of these courses I try and make as interactive as possible. In fact, the upcoming classes here, as well as the intro class, I try and actually walk you through some relevant or some understandable project examples, like the intro to project management course. Those 2 nights we actually walk through a birthday party or an anniversary party as a project. When I taught down at the Fauquier class or campus last year, the year before, we did a construction project building one of the new buildings out there. So it was interesting. It's also entertaining for a lot of the students to kind of figure out what I do and don't know about different technical areas, such as construction or a vineyard or running birthday parties or anniversary parties. But we make it through.
Chris, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What are some of the software packages that are used for project management? I know there's Microsoft Planner and Project and a couple others out there. What does the industry recommend?
So it's interesting because the industry, and especially PMI, does not recommend any specific tools, because they're just that, right? You learn the basics, you have knowledge of the basics, and then it's up to you and your leadership to determine what is the best way or most effective way, or in this case tools, to help run your projects. You're stealing all my stories from me, Guy, because one of the stories I tell during the class is, having spent almost 8 years with IBM, you would think that they were all tooled up and have anything and everything you would ever need to run projects, the quote unquote right way. But I can tell you the projects I ran there, especially when it comes to scheduling, I did a Microsoft project schedule, or those fancy little Gantt charts that most people are familiar with, probably once, and ran most of my schedules through Microsoft Excel. Actually, it's a little more hands-on, a little more cumbersome, but it gave me what I needed, gave me what my customers needed. But there are a lot of software packages out there. It's folks are running them off of Slack. Microsoft Teams is starting to integrate into a lot of those different project tools. And then as Agile has become more popular, there's products out there such as Git, Jira, which also interface with a lot of different software development components as well.
Very
Hopefully
cool. Thank
answers.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.